I call Sir William Sell.
Mr. Chairman,
Order.
thank you,
I've called one
Mr.
of your,
Chairman.
I've called one of your colleagues. Yep.
Thank you,
Sir William
Mr.
Sell.
Chairman. Mr. Speaker, normally at the third reading speech, we're generally wanting to express our gratitude to people who have considered the legislation and thank members of the Select Committee. I don't feel any sense of gratitude tonight, sir. In fact, if anything, I feel more animosity and angry towards the Minister and that government of his. I should be grateful to Mr. Alfred Ngaro for acknowledging that there is a housing crisis, but I know the way he behaves now. Once upon a time, he was a caring person, but he now reflects everything bad about this government. The arrogance, the uncaring, the fact that he says to the Pacific community that there is a national housing crisis, but then comes to this House and votes down every amendment that we've put up to grow the housing stock, to crack down on speculators, and to restore Housing New Zealand and to enable Housing New Zealand to look after those needy. And he will be voting down every single one of those amendments. You see how he's changed, Mr. Speaker, in only, 2 terms? You see how he's changed? He reflects the total arrogancy of that particular government. So this is a government that has been in power for the last 8 years. And as a government, they have been privileged with the powers, the authority, the resources to do something about this housing crisis. But for 8 years, sir, we've simply been told this is what they're doing, and the fact remains that in that 8 years, we have seen inequality go up, increase. The number of people in homeless situation has gone up by 20%. That's right, sir. People living in cars have become normalised. People living in garages have become normalised. In fact, their own government department now refers people into garages as if that was an acceptable mode of accommodation, sir. That is wrong. That is totally wrong. If they were genuine, if they were sincere about addressing this housing crisis that all of New Zealand now recognise and all of New Zealand now talk about, if they were sincere, sir, they would have voted in support along all the opposition parties with each of the amendments that we put forward to address this housing crisis. Sir, I don't understand how people in that side of the House can accept that the average price of a house in Auckland is now over $1 million. I don't understand how they can say that that is affordable housing for people in Auckland, when for working class communities such as mine and Mangere and many others, on an average income of $60,000 will not be able to service a mortgage close to $1 million. They won't be able to access mortgages because they won't have the 20% that is required to buy a house at that particular price. But it's not just Auckland. The housing unaffordability crisis has spread out to the regions, has spread out to the South Island. So it's not just Auckland that we're talking about. The Minister earlier came down and presented some graphs. I don't know whether he made those graphs up. We will never know, sir, because this bill was never forwarded to a select committee. This House was denied the benefit of receiving a select committee's advice, denied the benefit of receiving public submissions from the general public. I suspect, sir, if that had been done, many, many more of opposition members on this side would have been a little bit more confident about what we were passing tonight. So I don't feel any confident whatsoever. You see, part one, whilst we would agree about the transition period of extending those housing accord and the special housing authority to give time to those to be implemented, the reality remains, sir, the new powers in that part one enables the minister to override local authority, to override the Auckland Unitary Plan that have been worked upon by elected councillors, local board members. They don't have that right, sir. They don't have that right, but in the regulatory impact statement, I note that there were 5 special housing areas, sir, that are established on land that is sown unresidential, that is not sown residential. And this government gave the minister the power to override the Auckland Unitary Authority for the sake of those five special housing areas. Part 2, sir, concerns me. I draw your attention to what the Metiria Ture said earlier. I'm now suspicious more so than ever about what mess that this government has created that we will end up paying for. What mess this government has created because of the disgraceful way that this minister has behaved, sir. It is, as Andrew Little said, a constitutional disgrace that this minister is removing property rights from those who once upon a time were the original owners of land that were forcibly taken under the Public Works Act for the sole purposes of creating affordable state accommodation. If that is no longer the purpose, sir, it should be the original owners, including iwi, that we should be returning those lands to. This government has made fun of the Kiwi Build legislation commitment that we've made, sir. We've presented that as part 3 of this bill and asked them to examine it, and we've debated it. But as I've said, sir, it is shameful on some members on that side of the House who will go out to the community and say, yes, we understand there's a housing crisis, we feel sorry for you, but then come back and turn up into this House and vote down for the legislation that will improve the lot of people in need. So, next Saturday, Te Puia Marae will recognise the Māori wardens who have worked alongside to provide temporary accommodation for people sleeping in cars. It is their hope and wish that we do not return to having to supply this temporary accommodation next year. But based on what we have heard, from this minister and the way that this government had voted against the various amendments that we've put forward to address the national housing crisis, I believe, sir, that we will be back again next year in the cold of winter, again with Te Puia Marae and many other maraes offering again temporary accommodation for people who are sleeping in cars and overcrowded situation. It is appalling, sir, for a country such as New Zealand, who pride ourselves as one of the wealthiest of developed nations, as somebody who rubs shoulders with Obama, of somebody who rubs shoulders with some of the more greater economic powers of this world, to then come back to this country and accept the fact that we have a growing number of young people who will never, ever be able to afford to buy their home at increasing prices unless mum and dad provides some gift of an equity of a family house. That's the situation that this government has created. It is solely because of their policy. They have the power, the resources to address this crisis, but they just won't. They won't address it. And as I've said repeatedly now to members of our own community, and I've said it to Mr. Alfred Ngaro a month ago, the only way that a Labour government would be able to build 10,000 houses a year, 100,000 houses for the next year, mind you, sir, in Auckland, we need 44,000 houses today to meet the ongoing population growth. And nothing provided in this piece of legislation is ever going to address that. It won't address it today, it won't address it tomorrow, it won't address it next week. And so next year again, I fear that not only will Te Puia Marae have to open its doors for the homeless, but we will see a growing number of people living in those homeless situations. And all of that is because of this government policy. And as I've said again to the young people, and I'll continue to say it, the only way that we can improve and address this housing crisis is when we get rid of this lot. We've got to get rid of this government here, because that's the way that you can bring about change.
It's tragic
That's the
to
way
interrupt the
that
member,
we
but
build-
his time has expired.